Good evening, everybody. I am Betsy Fischer Martin, the Executive Director of the Women in Politics Institute at American University, and we are so glad that you are with us this evening for another installment of our virtual summer series, Women on Wednesdays. To those of you new to our events, WPI is a nonprofit and nonpartisan institute in AU School Public Affairs that aims to close the gender gap in political leadership. We offer academic and practical training for young women to run for office, and we facilitate research and discussions like this one on women in politics. And we are delighted to have with us this evening Senator Joni Ernst, who made history in 2014 when she was elected Iowa's first female member of Congress, House or Senate, and the first female combat veteran actually elected to the Senate as well. So we're thrilled that she's here with us to talk about her new book, Daughter of the Heartland, My Ode to the Country That Raised Me. You might expect she has more than a few stories to tell about her personal life, her military experience, and her incredible career in politics. We'll talk to her about all of that. I will say plenty of time for questions. So if you do have questions, please go to the bottom of your screen. You'll see an Ask the Question tab. You can ask a question there, and you can also upvote other people's questions that you're interested in. So please take a minute to do that as we start our discussion. And also in the bottom middle of the screen, you'll see a large green button that will take you to a new window to open up a link that you can order a copy of the Senator's book as well. So Senator, welcome. Thanks for doing this tonight.
Oh, Betsy, thank you so much. I am honored to be with you and to be able to speak to your audience tonight as well and share some stories, and hopefully we'll have a few laughs as well as we go through the course of the next hour. It is an honor to be with you. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for being here. So I want to start really kind of at the beginning with your book is called Daughter of the Heartland. So take us back, if you will, to your early days growing up on your family farm in Stanton, Iowa, and tell us about that experience and what sort of that instilled in you.
Well, I did grow up on a farm, a small family farm in far southwest Iowa. It is very rural. So I grew up north of a community called Stanton, Iowa, which is where I attended school. And that school, for those that come from rural areas, this is not anything new, but in my graduating class from high school, we had 24 of us that graduated. Many of the men and women that I graduated with are still in our local community, and our children have been raised together, again, growing up in a rural community, and strong ties both to the farm and to the community that we grew up in. But Montgomery County is very rural, and growing up on that farm, it was a family farm. We just didn't have a whole lot. I didn't come from a politically connected family. I didn't come from a family of wealth. We certainly struggled at times, but we didn't really recognize that because all of the other kids that I grew up with, we were all in the same situation. So I've recounted stories of where when I went to school or we went to church on Sundays, if it had been raining, my mother, she was known for having a drawer in the kitchen filled with empty bread bags. We saved and recycled everything on the farm. And she would slip those bread bags over my shoes, over my sister's shoes, if we had to go out, because it was always muddy outside. You know, we didn't live in a city. We didn't have, sidewalks or paved roads. So if we were waiting for the school bus or just even headed out to the car to go to church, she wanted to protect those shoes because we didn't come from a family where you could buy another pair of shoes if you ruined them. So, that was just the stories that we grew up with, the situations that we grew up with, and understanding you find ways of moving ahead through whatever challenge. So, working on the farm, stories on the farm, you name it. If Dad needed it done, we were there to do it. My older sister and I and my little brother.
That's you in the photo that we're showing. You in the middle there.
Right.
Little baby brother. I love those cheeks. So speaking of farms, I want to just go from there and ask you about the famous Make 'Em Squeal ad that sort of put you onto late night television and a lot of attention when you were running for the Senate. Tell us about what you learned from that experience and how that came about. Because it's still referred to and talked about to this day. If anybody on this hasn't seen it, take a minute when we're done here and Google it. It's terrific.
And I still laugh about that ad too, because I sat down with my media consultants, the folks that do ads. And of course, they all come from different cities. They live in urban areas. And so they just wanted to know what it was like to grow up on a farm. And so I was sharing the stories, we had to clean out the farrowing stalls. So we were shoveling manure, putting down new layers of straw, whatever it was. And then we talked about, other chores that we did on the farm. And one of them is cutting hogs, or what that is, we're castrating the male hogs to get them ready to grow and go to market. And the media consultant, he was like, what did you just say? And I said, yeah, we would castrate the hogs with my mom and dad. It was kind of a family thing. You go do that. And he just was like, okay, all right, I'll look into this. So that night when he got back to his room, he went on YouTube and watched a video on castrating hogs. And he came back that next day as we continued our conversation about different ads or messaging. And he was like, I had to stop. He's like, I watched that first, little bit of it and I could not go any further. So, but what he said is, that's cutting pork. And so we decided, well, we'll try this line out because I want to go to Washington, D.C. We'll cut pork, meaning cut spending.
Right.
And so I used that line in a debate, and it was a televised debate. And people in the audience are supposed to be quiet. They all burst out laughing. And it was at that point we knew, wow, we can really do
had a good line.
Yeah.
What I think is interesting too about this is that, it's you being authentically yourself here in this setting. And I feel like I've talked to some female candidates over the years that find when they are more authentically themselves, that their personality comes across and that you no longer feel, and I think this is progress in the world, obviously, no longer feel that pressure to have to prove yourself or your experience. You don't have to be up there with a briefcase and, a suit on, right? That you can sort of be in an environment that shows your authentic self. And I think that's certainly progress.
And I think that is so important for women that are engaging in politics, is not to try to be like the men. I mean, why would we want to be like the men? We do have different experiences as women, and to be able to share those, when I am back home in my home community, these are people I have been raised with. This is the community that I go to church with. This is the community that has known me since I was that girl living on that muddy farm. They've known my parents. They've known my grandparents. I go to the grocery store in my yoga pants, my t-shirt, and no makeup. And they are totally okay with that. And I've even had our one of the food chains in Iowa, Hy-Vee, one of the store directors, he just retired, in my hometown. And when I saw him the last time, he was just like, Joni, I'm just so glad that you are still who you are. And
I feel like that's all of us.
Feel the need to put on airs.
Yeah.
You're just who you are. And he said, thank you for being you.
I feel like all of us these days in our yoga pants and no makeup, these days especially, right?
During COVID, yeah.
You write in the book about a tagline that you had that says "Mother, soldier, senator, and putting mother first. And your daughter, I took this from your Twitter account. I know you're proud of her. Is at West Point, and that is, you said in your book that you hope she would see you as a model for what's possible for women.
Yes, absolutely. And what I have tried to emphasize to other women, and not just young women, but other women as well, is that you can be a mom and you can be a woman who wears the uniform. You can be someone who has a career. You can be a stay-at-home mom too. Whatever it is, this is what a woman can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I have emphasized that to my daughter as she grew older and older. And I didn't have to force it on her. And actually, her decision to go into the Army was entirely her own. And it really caught me off guard, too. It was just one of those things that I think by setting an example, she saw that, hey, mom can do this. I can do this too. And matter of fact, I can go one step further and go active duty Army. So, just by setting an example for our children, I think, we allow them to grow, inform their decisions, but allow them to make their own decisions. And I think we should exhibit that to women of all ages, whether you're 15 or whether you're 50. There's always opportunity out there. And so that's what I wanted to show my daughter. And yeah, I'm very proud of her. She is a hard charger. She is just a determined young woman, very, very smart, and has a world of opportunity. And that's what I wish for all of the young women that are coming out of their schoolrooms today and going into that big, bright, beautiful world, is making sure that they have opportunity.
I want to talk a little bit about your service in the military. You served in the Army Reserves, and then went on to be in the National Guard in Iowa, where you actually deployed to Kuwait during the Iraq War for a year. Talk about that experience you had as a woman among mostly male leaders. You wrote in your book, I learned quickly that because it was such a boys' club, I would have to be assertive. I didn't have female role models, so I had to create my own leadership style. How did you do that?
Yeah, and again, it goes back to being that authentic person. Just be who you are. Don't try and be a male, dominant alpha male leader if that's not who you are. I certainly can be an alpha, but I can do it in a way that is different than the men. And many of my soldiers came to see me as their mom. I was the old lady in the company. Typically it's a male commander and they call him the old man. That's just what you referred to.
But you certainly weren't old.
No, I was early 30s when we deployed, and I was a company commander, but I was the old lady, not the old man, but the old lady. And so they would bring their issues to me more as a mother. And I found, in counseling some of these young soldiers, not just on job performance or what our mission set was, in driving through Kuwait and Iraq at the beginning of the Iraq War, but, just in helping them through situations that they really felt maybe only a woman could give them advice on, whether it was illnesses with their children back home or just needing to, pour out whatever was on their mind if they were struggling with the long hours, that we were pulling. I mean, literally, my truck drivers were driving 20 hours a day, 20 hours a day at the beginning of the war. And they would have driven more if we had allowed them, but by Army regulation, they have to get 4 hours of sleep during wartime. But they were so driven, but they still had home life, and they still were going through, hardship being away from their families. And being a woman, I think, really was good in that aspect, and that they felt more comfortable coming and kind of letting down that guard and being able to talk to me as a mother figure. in some of those situations. And so I think as a leader, it is important that we are who we are and we show compassion. I had a soldier when I was a battalion commander. So this was well after deployment. When I became a battalion commander, he had run into some trouble. He was a full-time soldier and had gone off to a military school, and he was an alcoholic, and he was caught and received an OWI while he was away at this military school. He was expelled from the school, and I could have discharged him or busted his rank, and he would have lost his full-time job. But I sat down and counseled him with his NCO, his non-commissioned officer. And we had a very, very constructive discussion, but only as a mom, only as a woman too, could I sit down and really have that heart to heart with him and get to the heart of his issues and understanding, and he admittedly was an alcoholic. And he sat down with me and, after he came and reported in, sat down. And the first thing I said was, Sergeant, I am really disappointed in you. And he broke down crying. And we had a very compassionate discussion. I kept him on because I believe in second chances. And I believe that he was a good soldier. He just had an issue he had to overcome.
Right.
And so we were able to provide those resources. But I think, he felt okay crying in front of me. He felt okay sharing some of the issues that he had in his personal life that he was trying to shield from those of us that he worked with professionally. So my advice, always be authentically who you are. And I think that women can be exceptional leaders and show great compassion. And we're very good at that. And I think more women should do that, not just try to be the man.
Right.
But be who you are.
So when you came to the Senate, you were on the Senate Armed Services Committee, appropriately enough. But you write about your experience there at first. And you said when you came on to the Armed Services Committee, some of the older men there, you said, I could feel their dismissive attitude toward me. How did you approach that? I know you had certainly Senator McCain as one of your allies, but how did you approach coming on to that committee and with that sort of dismissive attitude? I'm sure that went away quickly, but how did you make that go away?
Well, we have to have thick skin.
Yeah.
Ladies, you have to have thick skin. Politics is not for the weak at heart. So really going in there and understanding that there are, perhaps biases that some of the older men would have about a younger woman joining what used to be, quite exclusively the men's club, especially in an area such as the military and the armed services, which in past years is predominantly men. But going in there and understanding that, what, I've worn those boots. My boots have been in the sand. Many of the people on that committee have never worn our nation's uniform. I'm the subject matter expert. I understand what it is to have hardship while deployed. I can understand that from a soldier's perspective, from that private all the way up through the ranks. And they can't. So my decisions are informed by actual real world experience. And some of them didn't have that. It doesn't make them lesser senators, but it does make me the subject matter expert in that area. So the advice I've always given to women, especially in that situation where it's a younger woman going into a crowd of men, is always when you walk into that room, you present yourself as the subject matter expert. Whatever your passion is, know it inside and out, and leave no doubt in any man's mind that you know what you're talking about. And that will dispel any concerns that those gentlemen have about your rightful place in that room.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the other female members in the Senate? There's only 26 of you, but you all have a close friendship. You get together for dinner. Is it once a quarter? Tell us about that and how important that's been during your time here in Washington.
It has been very, very important. And I have shared the story too about just recently being in Des Moines with a group of women, business professionals that came together and we were talking about different situations in the Senate. And they were like, well, share some of the bills that you have done bipartisan work on, and which I strive for in any of my bills is to get a member of the Democratic Party to co-sponsor. And I started naming off all of these bills that I had worked on, whether it was armed services, agriculture, small business, judiciary. It was so funny that, and the women caught on before I did. They all started laughing. And when I was naming off all those bills and the co-sponsors, they were all Democratic women. And so we have developed these relationships through our bipartisan suppers and our get-togethers. We don't talk about legislation when we're sitting down to eat a meal, to break bread. It is certainly us sharing our thoughts just about our families, about what it is to serve our country. And we've developed those relationships that goes beyond the legislation, but it provides a foundation for when we are back in the office and able to work together. And I feel it's an important part of what we do. Dianne Feinstein is one of the primary sponsors of these bipartisan dinners. Susan Collins has kind of taken over that role from the Republican Party. And we all get together every other month. And we all take turns in hosting different events. And it was just last week in the Judiciary Committee. Dianne and I have done a lot of work together. I admire her very much. Obviously we'll be split on certain issues. But Dianne came up to me last week and she said, Joni, and it's a challenging time right now in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And Dianne came up and she said, we're facing so many issues. She said, I really think it's time to get together for another women's dinner. And she said, would you be willing to co-host that with me? And I said, absolutely, Dianne, let's have our staffs get together and find a date that works for most of the women, just so we can get together again to share a glass of wine or to break bread and just be together as a Senate family.
Yeah, and
I think that's important.
And I think a lot of women too, especially, the Institute we run is nonpartisan. And I think when we do programs too, we have women, Republican, Democrat, Independent from both sides. And there's this notion of being supportive. And I guess sometimes it's probably difficult or can be difficult when politics intervenes sometimes in that. You wrote about in the book, running against another woman, Deb Fischer, for a leadership post, and you all handled that seemingly very well. But then you also wrote about Kirsten Gillibrand, who you were friends with, and she came out and endorsed one of your, it's not going to be your opponent, but yes, going to be one of your opponents for your reelection, and didn't really give you a heads up on that.
Yeah.
And so how do you kind of navigate when you think about women supporting other women, doing it in a way that's, obviously you have to do what's best for yourself politically or for your district or for your own reelection, but being able to do that in a way where you can still be supportive of
others. And that's another thing, is that a lot of people would take great offense to having a friend endorse somebody else.
Yeah.
But again, folks, if you're engaging in politics, you have to have a thick skin. But again, you have to understand that it's not personal. And I don't take it personally. Because I love Kirsten. Truly I do, because she is a good friend. And, she was hurt because she was endorsing my opponent, because obviously they are politically aligned. And for Kirsten to get more of her work done, she needs more Democrats in the United States Senate.
Mm-hmm.
I get that. I understand that. Certainly, I would love to have more Republicans serving in the United States Senate, but I love her and she is my friend. And so after that announcement went out that she was endorsing my opponent, she quickly found me on the floor of the Senate, and she was so upset about it. And she's like, Joni, I really wanted to let you know ahead of this, and things being what they were, the announcement got out ahead of her. But she is still a very good friend, and we actually were visiting just a little bit ago about another piece of legislation that we might be able to work on together. But she will always be a friend, and you just have to understand you can't take things personally. We know that we have different goals and different objectives out there, but I would like to think that many of the women that are in the Senate now, that I will always be friends with, regardless of whether my tush is in that seat or not in that seat, that we will all have at least some common goals. And so, I value these friendships between the women. And again, there are just certain things we will disagree on wholeheartedly. But I firmly believe that if we have shared passions, regardless of party, we should be working together on those shared passions.
I want to ask you, when you first came into the Senate, you were called to Mitch McConnell's office, sort of like being called to the principal's office. And he actually asked you if you would please give the State of the Union address, which may seem like a punishment to some people after the last couple of them have gone awry. But you managed to pull it off. I think you told your bread bag story.
I did.
And made some of the late night shows about that. Yeah. But how was that kind of coming in new and being tapped to, give the Republican State of the Union response with all eyes on you? That must have been a stressful time.
It was very stressful. It was very stressful. But again, just in being comfortable with who you are, being comfortable with your own personal story, and being able to step in front of that camera. And it's so weird. Just to be positioned and ready to go, because President Obama was speaking and we weren't sure, at what point will his address to the nation end, and when will you start? So you actually those that are giving the response to the president. So I was giving the response to President Obama's speech. I had to stand in front of that camera ready to go. I can't remember how long I was standing there, but it makes for a very long evening standing there. So quite literally just standing in front of this camera.
I'm sure the lights are hot too.
And the lights are very hot. So remember the Marco Rubio,
you can see why he needed the water.
Grabbing the water bottle.
Right.
Drink. So having learned from that experience, there were some camera guys and crew members, and they were like on water duty. So they had, a bottle of water on a table kind of out of the camera shot. And every so often they would bring the water bottle to me. So I'm just standing on this X on the floor and taking a sip of water quick and sending it back so that at least I was staying hydrated. But to be asked to do that was a really significant honor, to be able to project again an Iowan's voice to the country. I'm so proud of where I come from. I'm proud of my upbringing. I'm just so honored to serve the state of Iowa, and I wanted to make sure that I did a really good job for folks back home in addressing the nation. And so it was a lot of pressure. It was very stressful, but I was so honored to be selected to serve in that position.
I want to ask you also about a story that you write in your book about the potential of being selected as Trump's VP pick in 2016. And two things there, I guess. as we are sort of at the moment now where Vice President Biden is going to be making his selection, and we know it will be a woman, can you just share a little bit about what that experience is like for someone going through that selection process and having to, I don't know if you got as far as having to turn over documents and to be vetted and all of that, but just a little bit about that process, and then ultimately, why you decided not to move forward on that.
Yeah, and it was, again, talk about a stressful environment. Having those discussions with the Trump campaign and going through that interview process. I did meet with the president and his wife Melania. We sat down at first, one-on-one with the president, and then Melania joined us midway through that interview process, and just visiting with both of them about different issues, things that were important to me. And I really enjoyed having that time with the president. He would ask very thoughtful questions, and he would listen to me as I gave my answers. But I just knew that moving forward with this, and I did not select to go through the vetting process because I just knew it wasn't the right time for me to move forward. And it was, I won't say it was hard to make that decision, but it is, and I never regret the decision that I made not to go forward with that process. But there were just a lot of things that timing was not right. I think with my personal life, my daughter was in high school. I knew that there would be enormous pressure on her. Some of the other things, obviously, that happened later on, and I shared in my book, had a factor in that decision as well. But moving forward, I was just so honored to be elected in 2014 to represent Iowa. And that was a commitment that I had made to Iowa voters as well, is that I would be their United States Senator. And it was a commitment that I intended to honor. So very, very thankful to be serving in the United States Senate and to have the platform I did, and to be able to still work with President Trump on a number of issues that are very important to Iowa, just in a different aspect than being a vice president. But I'm just very, very thankful to be where I am today.
You mentioned being very candid in your book about some of the issues that you had went through in your personal life, and which became public, and then you very candidly spoke about them. You write about sexual assault, you write about domestic violence, your own marriage, and you've said that doing that, there's no way to make it pretty, so I might as well be upfront about what happened. You said in an interview, and you said that sharing your story and writing the book has been a little bit liberating in that respect. What do you hope to get across to people by talking about some of those painful times that you went through?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of men and women that have gone through really difficult situations like divorce. And divorce is hard enough to go through. But then when you have the added strain of having been in an abusive relationship and a non-supportive relationship, it's just very hard.
Right.
And so what I wanted to communicate, once all of that information became public in my divorce, I was heartbroken because I didn't want my family to know the hardships that I had gone through. And certainly my mother and my daughter had witnessed some of that. And it was hard enough that they had to go through some of this with me, but then to have the whole world know that, wow, Joni Ernst was vulnerable. Joni just went through these things and feeling very weak. And we shouldn't, and I know better than that. But being the one that is being abused or has been physically abused, you feel weak. And it's hard to admit to others that I was in a vulnerable position. And but what happened after the information came out is so many women, and I actually did have some men that came forward too and shared their own experiences with sexual assault, with domestic violence. But one woman in particular came to me after an event and pulled me aside, and she said, Joni, you went through these horrible things in your life, and yet you overcame those challenges. You went on, you were a battalion commander, you know, you served our country, and you're a United States Senator. And that it was at that moment that it hit me that in spite of challenges, I've been able to push through those. And I thank my parents for the upbringing I had. You know, just drive through. Tomorrow's going to be another day. And so what I want women to understand is that in spite of those challenges, whatever they may be, is that we shouldn't let those challenges define who we are as a person, that we can overcome challenges and go on to do good things. We can go on to have happy lives. We shouldn't be caught up in the sorrow and the pain, and understand that tomorrow will be a new day and we can start all over again. And it was through that painful process of having that information put out there. I thought it was such a bad thing at first, but you know, moving through that and hearing from women through emails, through notes in the mail, at town halls, you know, pulling me aside afterwards, I understood that, you know, perhaps my story can empower other women, that they can understand that this doesn't define who you are. You're not a vulnerable person. You can overcome and regain your strength.
And I read where you had said to your constituents after the news, you said, I want people to understand that I'm the same person I was last week. You just know more about what's inside of me now.
Absolutely. And I think people understand why it is I drive so hard to protect those that have been victims, but became survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence, and why those areas have been important to me. Why it is that I volunteered when I was in college for a domestic abuse hotline, a sexual assault hotline, and eventually worked my way up into carrying a beeper. I actually did calls to go work with survivors at the hospital, at the jail, you know, just running errands with women so they felt safe, you know, just simply going to get groceries, whatever it was. You know, I've always felt that it was important to give back. And because I had been helped after my own sexual assault, which was a first boyfriend, a very, very unhealthy relationship. After that, and after the support that I had received, I felt it was important for me to give back to that organization and to help others that might be in that same situation, and just being service driven. And that helped me overcome some of those obstacles that I felt, you know, with my own personal worth. I think I struggled with that. And I think maybe the women that are on this event tonight, maybe some of them may be struggling. You know, I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of a good career, you know, whatever it might be. But, you know, just my words, you are worthy. And we set our own self-worth.
Right.
We set
so
that,
important.
not others.
Right. That's so important. I wanted to ask you, we've got a lot of questions for you from the audience. One of them here from Jessica is, do you have any female political inspirations when you start? Did you have any female political inspirations when you started in your political career? And who did you look up to in politics?
My goodness. Yes. Okay. So one that probably most of you don't know, but Nancy Butker from Iowa was a state senator when I went into the state Senate, and she had served for many years in our Iowa legislature. And she had been an educator. She was obviously a statesman working in our Iowa legislature, but she was so well respected with both of the parties. And she was a prayer warrior as well. I mean, she and I would pray together over different situations. And she just really mentored me so well in the Iowa Senate. But our governor, Kim Reynolds, is an exceptional leader. And she had been my area's state senator before I became a state senator. And she was originally one of the first people to reach out to me and support me in raising for and in running for county elected office. So Governor Kim Reynolds, state senator, now retired Nancy Butker, and then certainly on a national scale, I was always in awe with tremendous women like Condoleezza Rice and others that had really broken barriers for women. Just being so well educated and well spoken on so many of the big issues that we're facing our nation.
You mentioned Governor Reynolds, and I was just and her encouragement of you to run in the first place. Can you talk about the importance of encouraging other women to run for office? And I know a couple of times when you were running for that county position, and then when you were running for state senator, you had people tapping you on the shoulder, encouraging you to run, but then also saying, "I'll help you."
Yes, absolutely. And interestingly enough, when Kim Reynolds ran for that state Senate seat, I had already been asked to run for that same state Senate seat, but again, just not having the right time or the right support to run for state Senate, I chose not to run. And Kim did, and I'm so glad she did because she was the right person at the right time. But her encouragement and over again, and other people's encouragement over and over again, finally led me into the state Senate and then eventually led me into the United States Senate. But what we find is that, and this is statistically proven, there are groups like 50-50 by 2020, encouraging women to run. They've gone back and studied this, and they find it takes at least 3 times, of a woman being asked to run before she will even consider it. And again, men, they'll just jump right in. They don't need somebody else telling them, hey, you can do this. They just jump in. Their egos are a little different, I think, than women. And no offense, please, men out there, no offense to men. I wish more women were like that too, because again, it's all about our self-worth.
Right.
Can I do this? We need more women to step up.
Here's a question from Juliana. She says, do you know about the national strategy on women, peace, and security? How can we encourage more women to be a part of the armed forces and law enforcement? And do you believe there's a need to have more women in leadership positions within these institutions?
Absolutely, I do. And I believe that we do need more women serving in the military, more women in law enforcement, and that will lead to more women serving in leadership positions, regardless. I even look at corporate America, and I think that there should be more women in leadership positions. But the only way we get there is by joining those ranks. And so we do need, and it's not just women, but it is, with the national dialogue right now, it's not just women, but it's also people of color. We really need everyone engaging in their communities and in these activities, whether it is, local elected office, a state, federal elected office, whether it's the military, whether it is serving on corporate boards or otherwise. It is really great to get involved, and we shouldn't have to ask you 3 times. If you need me to ask you 3 times, I'm going to ask.
Yeah.
But we want you to engage. And I do believe that we will be better reflective of our communities and our communities' needs if we have more women and more people of color joining those ranks.
We have two questions for you about the Equal Rights Amendment, and wondering if you are supportive of that and if you are going to join as a co-sponsor.
Yeah, Iowa passed their Equal Rights Amendment years ago. I want to say it's been probably a couple decades now. So I don't know that the bill will actually come up in the Senate, and I do need to go back and see who, if it. I'm sure it has been sponsored in the Senate, but go back and take a look at that. I think, and I'm still working through the recent Supreme Court ruling that came out yesterday or the day before. It's 170 pages. I'm not all the way through it yet.
Yeah.
But with that, we need to see how that reflects what is in the text for the Equal Rights Amendment.
I mean, on the Civil Rights Act? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So we'll go back and marry those two together and then decide how we proceed after that. There may need to be some changes and thoughts towards that, but certainly Iowa has been a leader in this area. Will probably continue to be a leader in this area.
I wanted to also ask you, because I saw the other day, and it was a little unclear in the article, but it seemed to say that you were supportive of the notion of renaming some of the military bases that are named after Confederate generals. Is that true?
Right. Yes. And I am very open to a discussion on this. And I do think it has to be a discussion, and not necessarily a mandate, but I do think through a discussion, we will arrive at a decision that is supportive of removing Confederate generals' names from these military bases. And this is my point. Now, I come from the party of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln served a Republican Party that was about the abolition of slavery. And then moving forward, move through the Civil War. The Civil War is now ended. And we have Confederate generals that took up arms against their country, which according to our Constitution and all the powers that be, they have committed treason against the United States. They could have been tried. They could have been hung, but by the grace of our United States, they were chosen to be forgiven. And we tried to heal the nation at that point. Now, if they had been tried and hung, I guarantee you we wouldn't have named or given Confederate names to these bases. So I see them as men that committed treason against the United States. And so my personal opinion is I would be more than fine if we change out these names. Because there are other honorable Americans that we can name these bases after. And I know I get a lot of blowback from some of our conservatives, and they will accuse me of trying to rewrite history. And I had just a horrible Facebook post the other day that compared me to ISIS. Really.
That's lovely.
Yes, it was just very nice. And that I'm trying to destroy our nation's history, just like ISIS. And I was like, you've got to be. But no, I'm not trying to rewrite history.
Right.
I am not trying to besmudge our American history, but I can give you the names of 10 Confederate generals that did besmudge our American history. And so that's my personal opinion on it. And I do think we should have discussions on this. It is a turning point in our nation's history. And I think now is an appropriate time if we are moving forward, as been suggested by many of my colleagues, many constituents, why don't we name the bases after Medal of Honor recipients? Those that have truly given unselfless sacrifice to our great United States.
Do you think the president would be willing to talk to you about that?
I am hopeful that the president will engage in those discussions. I hope so. I would hate to think that he would reject our Defense Authorization Act over renaming bases. I think this is a discussion that he should have, and it shouldn't just be with us in Congress.
Right.
It should be with constituents across the United States. So in Congress, our National Defense Authorization Act, we've, as a group, already made that determination that we should have these discussions. So what I would hope that the president would hear is from others, those that have served our country, those from some that might be within the civil rights movement. You know, we need to hear from a good variety of people on why it would be necessary, or even from the opposing point, because I think it's important that you hear all sides why we shouldn't. But to me, it makes sense.
Here's a question from Julie. What are you projecting for the Iowa economy post-pandemic?
I see the Iowa economy really picking up. That is, if we can get our businesses back open, and this is something that Iowa has struggled with even before the pandemic, but labor shortages. At any given time last year, we had 60,000 open jobs. Our unemployment was down to about it went back and forth between 2.4% to 2.7%. So really struggling with, okay, now we're opening back up. There are a number of workers that had to be furloughed because of the pandemic. Well, now they are on expanded federal unemployment, and they're receiving more pay through unemployment than if they were working. And so until their unemployment runs out, many of them are really struggling. They don't want to go back to work because they see that benefit for their family. But we have Iowa businesses, because there's a labor shortage already and those workers are receiving additional unemployment dollars, they're ready to open up. They just can't get people back to work. So as soon as we can get people back to work, I see our economy just booming again.
Let's see. Here's a question about Republican women, and you know, you've talked about the importance of electing Republican women. And AJ asked, how do we combat the anti-women narrative that's sticking to the Republican Party with the lack of the Violence Against Women Act renewal and the ERA, et cetera? It hardens down ballot. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, and we really are trying to work on those issues. And I have been working with Dianne Feinstein on the Violence Against Women Act. It is something that is very important to me.
Sure.
So there were a few key differences between the legislation that came over from the House and what Dianne and I were trying to work on in the Senate. And this is where partisan politics really comes into play. Because Chuck Schumer was, he is the Democratic leader in the Senate. He was very insistent upon taking up the House version of VAWA. Dianne and I wanted to do a bipartisan bill because that's the only way we will get legislation across the finish line in the Senate,
right,
and then hopefully in the House. Nothing will get done unless it's a bipartisan movement. So Dianne had warned me. She had given me a heads up, and she kept telling me as we'd get together, we'd sit down and work through these differences. And she told me at one point, and then many times over, that, you know, Chuck is really putting a lot of pressure. He really wants me to introduce the House version. And I was like, Dianne, we are so close. Let's just keep working on it. And she agreed, and we did. We kept working on it for a couple more months. We actually kept working on it, even though she was getting this pressure from Leader Schumer. And finally, it came to a point, Dianne just flat out told me and told my staff as we were working together in this little huddle in her office. And she said, Chuck has told me I have to introduce. I can't hold off any longer. And so she went ahead and introduced the House version of the bill. I went ahead and introduced a skinny down Republican version of the bill. But Dianne told me, she said, Joni, we still have to continue working on this. We have to have a bipartisan bill. I agree. So Dianne and I are still working together. So we're still trying to find what will pass. It's no good if it doesn't pass. And that's what I want people to understand, is that even if we would take up the House version, it's not going to pass. And I harbor no thoughts that probably the Republican version would pass. And so Diane and I will keep working together to find what we hope would pass the Senate. And if not, I'm asking my majority leader to move forward with at least give us a straight up reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. You know, take what we have now and at least reauthorize it so that we can have additional time to find that bipartisan solution and modernize the Violence Against Women Act. So there are a lot of things that we continue to work on. We're trying to find the path forward. And sometimes it takes a really long time and a lot of effort to do that. But Diane and I, we've really committed to trying to find that path forward.
Great. Here is a good final question from Natalie. She says, do you have a process for de-escalating tense interactions with constituents who don't agree with you? I mean, you mentioned the ISIS posting on your Facebook page, but how do you approach those situations in order to find some common ground?
De-escalation. One, I did actually go back and respond, and this was on my personal page, which I don't do political stuff on my personal page. It's, you know, I post photos of my daughter and you know, friends, but what I did do, I went back and from my perspective about renaming military bases, and I just laid it out. I didn't point any fingers. I didn't tag anybody in it. It was just my perspective on why I believe what I believe. And so again, going back to understanding who you are as a person and what you believe and being able to share that in a calm and rational way. And I do a lot of town halls. I did 35 public town halls last year. And I can tell you when I go out to some of those more liberal leaning areas, you know, I have an audience, hundreds of people that will be probably anti-Joni. And maybe it's because of one stance or another, but just simply listening to them is really important to me. And I find that that can help diffuse certain situations. If they truly want to share a thought or an idea, they'll learn that they can do it in a calm, rational manner. If they're screaming at the top of their lungs, I'm probably not hearing their message. So if we can just simply have a conversation, sometimes that brings the tone down a little bit. And we can actually visit just person to person about what's going on. And I think that's really important, again, to have thick skin and understand that people have different passions and different ways of communicating. But the only time we can really have that two-way communication is if we're just having a conversation.
Right. I want to ask you one final question, but before I do, I want to let everybody else know too that next Wednesday we're going to have Simone Sanders with the Biden campaign, who has written a new book as well. No, You Shut Up, it's called, and she will be here. She will be here next Wednesday, so we invite you all to join us for that as well. And I guess before we go, Senator, we talked a little bit about you're up for re-election. How are you coping with trying to campaign in this era of coronavirus and, you know, not be able to be sort of amongst your constituents campaigning? How are you able to do that and get out? And how are you thinking about ways to do that over the next couple of months? Because that's got to be tough.
Oh, Betsy, it is tough. And I love being out with people and interacting with people. And so this has been really difficult for me, but we are trying to use whatever platform is available. So whether it's a Zoom, go-to meetings, you know, all of that. And I call it my Hollywood squares. You know, we're all doing that, or Facebook Live events, a lot of telephone town halls, all of that to reach as many people as possible. I'll be back out on the campaign trail. We just haven't figured out how to do it in a safe manner yet. We'll continue to work on that. But we have to use technology, and that's what we're faced with now. But getting out where I can when it makes sense will be important. But you know, it's just sharing as much information, utilizing whatever tools possible.
Well, thank you for coming virtually tonight to us, and I really appreciate all of your insights. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Good luck on the campaign trail, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Betsy. Okay. And thanks for everyone for joining tonight.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And if you missed any of tonight's discussion, there's a replay right at the same link that you can watch just a few minutes after we're done. So thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Betsy. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.